Hello, everyone. Welcome to another session of ILA Dialogues. Today we have with us Advocate Dhrupat Das. Dhrupat is an advocate practicing in Delhi and Guwahati with over 12 years at the bar. His primary area of practice is civil commercial dispute resolution and advisory. He also advises domestic and international clients on the structuring of technology related businesses. He is one of the founding partners of the law firm Pranay Anandas and Khanna, otherwise known as Panda Law. Pandala operates in the national capital and northeast regions. Dhrupat is from Guwahati, Assam. He started his legal career in Delhi, actively participating at various courts and tribunals since 2009. Over the last 3 years, he has diversified his practice in the Northeast region, establishing his firm's presence there, largely aided by the proliferation of remote working. He is an alumni of Mayo College, Ajmer, where he spent 9 years of his formative years. From Mayo, he moved to Pune, where he joined and completed Symbiosis Law School's BA LLB course. For the last 5 years, one of Drupal's area of interest has been the global distributed cryptographic economy evolving at a lightning pace. He has he has been regularly observing and interacting with the same. Today's interaction draws from this part of his experience and knowledge. Welcome, Drupad.
Thank you.
Today, Drupad will be speaking on regulation of crypto assets.
Thank you, Sudisha. Hi, Jamshed. Thank you, ILA, for making time on a Sunday. So first things first, it's a little customary for me to explain my background in crypto. It usually, entails telling you how long I've been involved, and the answer is since 2017. I think around May, June is when I got involved in this sphere and I started thinking about it and researching it in earnest. It can be termed as going down the rabbit hole. In 2017, the word cryptocurrency automatically meant that you were up to no good. People kind of imagine the worst when you said that, oh, I'm exploring crypto, or I'm dealing with crypto, or I'm, studying crypto. They could not understand what was the need for a cryptocurrency really. It's fair to say that the environment was positively hostile. So anyway, I started by understanding the Bitcoin white paper, which is ground zero for where all of this evolution kind of began. That you can call that the Big Bang event or the inception event. And the Bitcoin white paper lays out the technological roadmap for electronic peer-to-peer permissionless cash. How do you get the benefits and functionality of cash, but in a digital manner, without without censorship by anybody? That was a very key part of it. So very quickly, I realized that to understand Bitcoin, and blockchain was not a phrase that's used in the white paper, it came subsequently. So to understand Bitcoin, one has to understand how cryptography works, how some computer science works, how game theory is used to set up an incentivization system so that the system is made secure. You also need to understand some monetary theory, how the Austrian school versus modern monetary theory, what's the interplay between those two. And you need to understand what money is really. Because Bitcoin, the first use case of blockchain, which was Bitcoin, you could say, is of being money. Many people call it digital gold, many people call it many things, but essentially its job is to hold and retain value. So anyway, so fortunately, Bitcoin came at a place where a lot of my interests met. It was an intersection of many of my interests. And since 2017, I've been in it ever since. Just to sum up quickly about those early days, the total market capitalization of the entire industry at that point was hovering somewhere around 10 to 15 billion dollars. It was too small for anybody to consider, much less consider regulating. And today it stands at in excess of 1.2, 1.3 trillion dollars, right? So all the regulatory attention it is getting or not getting is kind of merited. It needs to be at the forefront of what people are thinking about going forward. Now, so I've structured my talk today in 5 parts. The first part is the regulation as it stands today. What's the landscape today? And a little bit of how it started and where it has reached. Second is to understand what exactly are we trying to regulate? What are cryptocurrencies? What are crypto assets? What are tokens? What is the role of encryption? The third part is I want to place this entire cryptographic revolution in a bit of a larger context of the technology cycles that are taking place. And these technology cycles, you can say, starts with the industrial revolution really, and 4 or 5 have taken place so far, depending on who you ask. Then the fourth part will be the regulatory challenges ahead. Given a slightly better understanding of what we are really trying to understand and an understanding of the larger context, what challenges do we see? And lastly, I'll conclude with some broad suggestions. So let's dive right in. So it's safe to say that the entire cryptographic industry is unregulated as a whole in India. There's no real regulation that's going on. There's a patchwork of circulars, advisories, strategic papers, one loan judgment, statements by public officials, one ED prosecution, an amendment to the Companies Act, and an RBI chairman's speech. This is kind of the length and breadth of where we can cobble together an understanding of the regulatory environment in India. So the first thing that comes out is by the RBI back in 2013. So it issues a guidance note or a cautionary note saying that, listen, please don't deal with Bitcoins, Litecoins, Dogecoins. That's the language used. And so this is, if you're dealing with it, it's extremely volatile, it's at your own risk, but it doesn't use the word cryptocurrency, it calls it a virtual currency. Then in February and in December of 2017, a similar cautionary notice also given by the RBI. Then you come to April of 2018. This is the first proper regulation that you get, which actually has some consequence. So the RBI essentially prohibits all the entities that it regulates from dealing with companies or with virtual currencies completely. The language that it uses is, in view of the associated risks, it has been decided with immediate effect, entities regulated by the Reserve Bank shall not deal in VCs or provide services for facilitating any person or entity in dealing with or settling VCs. Such services include maintaining accounts, registering, trading, settling, clearing, giving loans against virtual tokens, accepting them as collateral, operating accounts or exchanges with them, and transfer receipt of money in accounts relating to purchase and sale of VCs. Essentially, it says that VCs are a no-go area. And colloquially, this was a sort of ring fencing that took place. So they did not ban it, even though the news had, news had announced that it was complete ban and all that. It was not a ban. It was a ring fencing, so that all the RBI regulated entities couldn't interact with anybody who's dealing with cryptocurrencies, especially the exchanges. That's really where the on-ramp for people to purchase cryptocurrencies got blocked. But theoretically, you were still allowed to have peer-to-peer transactions, which is what the exchanges then fell back on. So they said, okay, Alice can transfer money to Bob using our platform. We will not hold any of the money ourselves. So, and they gave 3 months to everybody to exit their relationships, all banks. And the laws that they relied on for this was the Banking Regulation, RBI Act, and the Payment Settlement System Act. These are the 3 laws quoted. So now this is 2018. So 2018 is when the cryptocurrency market or the crypto token, crypto asset market was in general doing quite badly. It's known as crypto winter to many of us who were in the field back then. And this circular of 2018 was then followed up by a report set up by the Ministry of Finance through its Department of External Affairs. And this report in Feb of 2019 brought out what it called the Banning of Cryptocurrencies and Regulation of Official Digital Currency Bill of 2019. So it had a very negative view. It said that, yes, blockchain very good, but cryptocurrency is very bad. It still called it cryptocurrencies or virtual currencies. So the term crypto assets had not yet entered kind of regulatory use. And this was the report of the committee to propose specific actions to be taken in relation to virtual currencies. This was the report. One interesting fact is that it also laid the groundwork for an official digital currency, which is now called a central bank digital currency, CBDC. This is where all the action is right now. Then by January of 2000, with COVID just about to hit us, the situation started improving a little bit. Niti Aayog came out with a strategy paper. It was called Blockchain, the India Strategy, towards enabling ease of business, ease of living, and ease of governance. It was trying to resolve how businesses and government processes and inefficiencies could be done away with using blockchain. The point to note here is that this primarily dealt with private permissioned blockchains, right? So when we talk of crypto assets, most of us are actually referring to public blockchains that are not permissioned, which means that the blockchain is stored on nodes and servers all over the world. No one entity or company or country is storing those nodes. And secondly, any individual in the world or entity in the world can interact with it. You don't need any KYC, AML, nothing. You are free to deal with it. Just like Bitcoin is the core fundamental example of this. Now, with Bitcoin being the most being the most public and the most permissionless blockchain out there. And then you have the entire spectrum down to some other coins like USD Tether maybe, or Ripple, which have a company which is regulated, which can be shut down, which can be censored if the country within whose jurisdiction it falls so chooses. So there's a spectrum. Even though Ripple is permissionless, anybody can interact with it. So it's a privatized sort of blockchain, but permissionless. So there's a whole spectrum, and these are the 2-3 knobs that we really have to look at when we think of what really a cryptographic token is or cryptographic asset is. The infrastructure underlying it has the underlying infrastructure has to be looked at the moment you want to start thinking of controlling it, regulating it, and that's a whole different challenge altogether. So now, after the Niti Aayog paper, more good news comes in the form of the Supreme Court order of March 4th, 2020. And this was in the matter of Internet and Mobile Association of India versus RBI. So this was a fairly positive thing, positive judgment, where the Honorable Supreme Court set aside that earlier April 2008 circular of RBI ring fencing all the businesses. And it opened the way up for lots of new exchanges to come, and slightly a more positive attitude towards cryptocurrencies in general, I feel. And what had also happened by 2020 is that in the last 2 years, while the market was fairly depressed, a lot of underlying work, infrastructure work was going on. So it's not like so it kind of gave the whole industry time to regroup and strengthen itself, and which is part of a normal tech cycle. We'll come to that later. One part of the Supreme Court order that I want to actually quote, and this is kind of relevant because it'll lay the groundwork for a lot of the challenges that we'll face, is that it kind of identified the fact that cryptographic tokens, crypto assets can be shapeshifters. They can be many things at the same time. It can be a store of value, it can be a unit of measure, it can be a utility token, which is like it can be a security token. It has many functions. And unlike the legacy tokens or instruments that are there today, where one token does one function, many of these cryptographic tokens can do multiple things at the same time, depending on what your particular use case is. So what the Supreme Court said in this regard is, but what an article of merchandise is capable of functioning as is different from how it is recognized in law to be. It is as much true that virtual currencies are not recognized as legal tender, as it is true that they are capable of performing some or most of the functions of real currency, right? So it said that, yes, it may not be legal tender, but it can act as a currency. And even though at this point, they're still using the phraseology of virtual currencies, because see, currency has a very different and limited scope as opposed to an asset, as opposed to a token. So token will be the widest definition. So every currency would be a token, every currency would be an asset, but every asset need not be a currency, and every token also need not be an asset or a currency. So these are all subsets of one another. Then after the Supreme Court order of March 2020, we come to November 2020. This time, now this does not deal with cryptocurrencies or blockchain in general, but I put it here because I feel it is going to be significant. This is an innovation hub that the RBI set up in 2020. They announced it in 2020 with the idea of promoting access to financial services and creating an ecosystem that will focus on financial inclusion. So when you start looking at fintech solutions, somewhere or the other, blockchain does come in. And the moment blockchain comes in, then you start looking at tokenization. So there is going to be some rub here. Maybe there'll be sandboxes where experimentation can be done. So that will have to be seen. Then after November 2020, we come to 2021. 2021, we get another slightly positive paper, which is MeitY's national strategy on blockchain. So this now is also primarily dealing with private and permission blockchains. Even the RBI Innovation Hub will be dealing with private and permission blockchains. They will not be really focusing on public or permissionless blockchains. I don't think that will be the flavor of those regulatory authorities. So now in this national strategy on blockchain 2020, the two things that were actually noteworthy to me. First is that there's a portion in the very end where they note that now this is actually probably the report was written earlier. It says that Reserve Bank of India has put forth restrictions with respect to virtual currencies based on blockchain technology. And there is a circular to halt the use of cryptocurrency transactions in India. The aspect of activities involving tokenization, however, is ambiguous. So this is essentially the same problem that the Supreme Court has also identified, saying currencies are all good and fine, but what about the tokenized assets that are floating around now? And there is a whole zoo of them. And we'll come to that also, different types of tokenized assets. So, and as a warning, it says in banking regulation, there is a need to satisfy non-repudiation requirements through in-person verification. And there is a challenge to implement technological solutions for such requirements, especially for cryptocurrency based on blockchain. Now they are talking about public blockchains. They're not talking about private blockchains here, because in a public blockchain, there is no way that you can do in-person verification. Now, after 2021, March 2021 now. March 2021, the Finance Minister of India makes an interesting statement where she says that her view is that, of course, the Supreme Court has commented on cryptocurrencies. And while the RBI may take a call on official cryptocurrency from our side, we are very clear that we are not shutting off all options. And then she goes on to say that a cabinet note is being prepared and that they're looking at a calibrated approach. So this is now 1 year earlier, there was a complete ban being contemplated, but now at least the option shutting off all options is not taking place, even though they're taking a calibrated approach and there is some deliberation going on. That's the indication here. So this brings us to the next real regulation that we get, which is an amendment to Schedule 3 of the Companies Act. And this is Schedule 3. There's a particular portion that deals with general instructions for preparation of statement of profit and loss. And this they've amended to bring in certain additional information that a company now needs to declare, and which is with regard to cryptocurrency or virtual currencies. So wherever the company has traded or invested in cryptocurrencies, any profit or loss that would have occurred, that has to be reported. This is, and the last thing now is about 22nd of, I think, sorry. Then in May of 2021, you had the RBI bringing out a circular clarifying that the 2018 circular has been struck down by the High Court because a whole bunch of banks apparently were still misquoting that struck down circular to deny certain business opportunities to certain exchanges and all that were coming up. But in the same breath, the RBI also kind of very succinctly laid out the entire regulatory framework that existed as on date. So it said that banks, as well as other entities addressed above, may, however, continue to carry out customer due diligence processes in line with regulations governing standard know your customer, anti-money laundering, combating of financing of terrorism, and obligation of regulated entities under PMLA 2002, in addition to ensuring compliance with FEMA regulations for overseas remittances. So this is what now banks really have to focus on. So if anybody is contemplating any sort of cryptocurrency, crypto asset, crypto token business, this is something that will have to be kept in mind. And the last part of this chapter on what our regulatory framework today looks like is actually not a regulation. It is a view expressed by the Deputy Governor RBI, Sri Ravi Shankar, T. Ravi Shankar. And this has happened, I think, 8 days ago, July 22nd. So he was giving a keynote address in a webinar where he very nicely brought out the concept of a CBDC. And he was kind of positing that the CBDC is the requirement of the hour, and what money really is, and what are the issues that he foresaw in bringing CBDCs into the picture. So just 3 paragraphs from his speech, I think, are really interesting because it tells you what the RBI is thinking about money. At least the Deputy Governor of the RBI thinks about money and thinks about CBDCs. So he says that in modern economics, currency is a form of money that is issued exclusively by a sovereign or a central bank as its representative. It is a liability of the issuing central bank and sovereign, and as an asset of holding public. Currency is fiat, it is legal tender. Currency is usually issued in paper or polymer form, but the form of currency is not its defining characteristic. Now, having defined a currency as a liability issued by the central bank, we are now in a position to define a CBDC. So he defines a CBDC as legal tender issued by a central bank in a digital form. It is the same as a fiat currency and is exchangeable one-to-one with fiat currency, but its form is different. Now, this last part is where actually the difference between RBI and many of the people in the industry will show. This is where the rub is. So he says it is also important to understand what a CBDC is not. CBDC is not a digital or virtual currency. I suppose he means virtual currency, he means cryptocurrencies here. But it is not comparable to the private virtual currencies that have mushroomed over the last decade. Private virtual currencies sit at substantial odds to the historical concept of money. There are no commodities or claims on commodities as they have no intrinsic value. Some claims that they are akin to gold clearly stem from opportunistic views. Usually, certainly for the most popular ones now, they do not represent any person's debt or liability. There is no issuer. They are not money, certainly not currency, as the word has come to be understood historically. So I don't think there is any issue with anything here that he's saying, apart from the small point of what really money is. So money is a much larger concept than currency, right? Every currency is money, but all money may not be currency. So Yuval Harari in his book Sapiens kind of describes money as a fiction that society agrees upon. That once, and that's also what fiat means, right? Fiat currency means because I say so. So it means that because there's a general consensus amongst the people that this is what money is, then that is what money becomes. And here we have agreed that the rupee is what money is. And legally speaking, as per the Currency Act, the only money that one can use to pay taxes or to pay off their debts is the the rupee, and rupee is the only legal tender. So to that extent, I think there is no problem. But just to the small aspect of what really money is, maybe historically money can have a much broader concept. And in fact, in the speech, he himself recognizes that money can be shells, cowrie shells, or it can be bucks of a deer. And so to summarize, now that's literally all that I have found and I'm aware of in what is the regulation of cryptocurrency. So if I have to summarize in a line, it's that cryptographic tokens cannot be used as currency, but they can be owned and exchanged as assets, provided you comply with all legacy regulations. I think this is the long and short of where cryptographic regulations and crypto assets, how they're being regulated today. So a lot to be desired, a lot of clarity required, a lot of brains to be thrown at this problem. So now the second part of what I want to speak about is, what are we really trying to regulate? What is a cryptocurrency? What is a cryptographic asset? What is a crypto token? So these are fairly confusing questions. Like, it confuses me. I'm sure many others are as confused by what these things and these terms really mean, because they don't lend themselves to a very easy definition, and every definition has something different to say. So I will fall back on old Greek mythology. And in old Greek mythology, there was a creature called the chimera, Chimera, chimera. And the chimera was essentially a creature that was usually depicted as a lion, but with the head of a goat protruding from its back and a tail that's usually a snake. Let me share a photograph of what a chimera really looks like. Just that's a chimera, if you can see it. So that's a lion, goat, snake at the back. So what we are seeing today is a lot like this. One second. Stop share. It's not one thing. As I said earlier also, it's cryptocurrencies, crypto tokens, crypto assets are taking on multiple forms at the same time. So, are you regulating a lion? Are you regulating a goat? Are you regulating a snake? Which one is it? And one person who seems to be, who has fallen into this unfortunate pitfall is one of the largest exchanges in India, which is WazirX. So recently in June 2021, WazirX received a notice from the Enforcement Directorate, ED, where it was accused of certain FEMA regulations with regard to a token called USDT. So USDT stands for United States Dollar Tether. So the USDT is a token that's one is pegged 1:1 to a US dollar, as the name suggests. And it's actually fairly well regulated in the United States, where I think it is hosted. And it's also, there's some litigations pending USDT also. But the fact here is that USDT is actually it's not a project like Bitcoin or Ethereum or some others. It's just a stable coin. And stable coin is one big entrant to the ecosystem now, right? And CBDCs are actually coming into CBDCs, and stable coins are kind of going to occupy the same space in this ecosystem. So right now, public parties are releasing these stable coins, and some of these stable coins take these very complicated methods on how they have a basket of assets and calculating on the basket of assets, and regular adjustments take place to make sure that a stable coin remains stable. So this is basically the shape-shifting problem of cryptographic tokens. It does not lend itself well to definitions or categorizations. It's extremely hard to regulate as a moving target. So just to give some examples of projects that I have encountered, and I've just made a note of to bring out over here to give you a a slightly broader picture of what projects are going on. So once a regulator sits down to regulate crypto assets, these are the projects that he will have to deal with. So one recently I read of a project called Storj, STORJ. Now Storj is a project that's trying to bring, it's like a Google Drive, but on through a tokenized system, right? So you can essentially rent other people's hard drive space, and the payments for how much you pay how you pay them is using the storage token. And very recently, they have tied up with Tesla to store all the dashboard camera and other camera data that that a Tesla that the car may record in its day-to-day operation. It's a very interesting thing. If tomorrow I own a Tesla, I don't have to have and the Tesla has some God knows how many cameras, LiDAR, this, that, lots of things are happening so that it can work in an automated manner when it needs to. So all that information now I may want stored, I may not want stored. If I want to store it, I have to attach a hard drive and it'll be TB and TB of data every day. But this way I can store it on a decentralized storage system and I can pay with a coin. So now, but the storage token can work just like any other token. So how does a regulator approach this? Another token is the Binance token. Now Binance is an exchange, and whoever has Binance token tends to get he can pay fees on the exchange. He has a whole suite of other services that he can access with this token. But most importantly, the Binance, the organization, conducts this thing called a token burn, where they destroy a lot of tokens, which is very analogous to a share buyback, right? So these are now called exchange tokens, where simply by holding the token, you can profit off the success of that platform or that exchange, in this case Binance. Then obviously you have Bitcoin, which is an out and out currency. It can be digital gold depending on how you look at it. Then you have a project called Zcash. Zcash is private. It's a private cryptocurrency. So many regulators will absolutely have an issue with a cryptocurrency that is untraceable, untrackable. Like one thing with Bitcoin is that unlike Zcash, it is pseudonymous, not anonymous, which means that the Bitcoin blockchain will always contain, and on the block explorer, you can always refer to all the transactions. It's a public ledger. Anybody can, if you have my public key, you can punch in my public key, which is like my bank account number, and you'll have a history of my transactions. So once you can make the connection between my name and my address, all my details will simply just open up to you. So in that sense, Bitcoin is not anonymous, it's pseudonymous. So my name won't appear, but if you can put that together, then you will have all my details. Whereas Zcash has made extra effort to be completely anonymous. Then, as I said earlier, there's USDT, which is a stable coin. There are many others like it. Then you have Ethereum. Ethereum is now, when people enter this market, the two big behemoths who are fighting each other is Bitcoin and Ethereum, but both are absolutely different projects that do absolutely different things. Ethereum is a Turing complete computer. That's what they call it. It's essentially a decentralized computer on which you can operate decentralized apps, dApps, as they call it. Now, every time you interact with the Ethereum platform, and every time you execute a command, you have to pay some small degree or sometimes a large degree of fees, and that is paid in Ether, the token, right? So the purpose of Ether is actually to act as gas. That's what also they call it, gas. So the purpose is to act as gas, but it can also act as, if somebody just sits on Ether, the price keeps going up, because as more and more people use the platform, the value keeps increasing. So, it acts as a security also. But technically, I think some of the regulators are calling it a utility token. Then other interesting projects there's one called OpenSea, there's one called Rarible, Rarible. Now, these are platforms that host NFTs, non-fungible tokens. Now that's an entire different line, evolutionary line of cryptographic tokens, because all other tokens that we usually think of, Bitcoin and Zcash, USDT, Ethereum, are all fungible tokens, right? We don't care which token comes to us. It's like money. But NFTs essentially get tied to art. It gets tied to copyrights, maybe. There's a whole sequence of digital assets that one can now own. Cultural digital assets also, you can call it. So photo and NFTs work by a system of minting, which means that you can, by paying gas fee on the Ethereum blockchain, you can mint an NFT, and then that minted token comes into your wallet. The wallet is where all these tokens will always be stored. And as we were discussing a little earlier, before I think we started this, the wallet is where all your tokens are stored, just like a normal wallet. The analogy is fairly apt. And how wallets are regulated is going to be a big part of the regulatory challenge. But coming back to NFTs, so NFTs are also, they walk and talk and behave like a normal crypto token. But unlike crypto tokens that are used as currencies or are used as assets, this has a whole different use case that comes out of it. So, and NFTs are fairly new. There's a lot of speculation going on, and NFTs are extremely good for people, artists, essentially, musicians, artists, filmmakers, poets, maybe. Anybody who currently has issues with the legacy systems of how they monetize. So a whole suite of monetization options will open up. Then another example I can give, a bit like storage, is Filecoin. So Filecoin and storage are kind of coins that are operating at the infrastructure level of this entire ecosystem, right? So Filecoin also, essentially, the problem that has been identified here is that all blockchain based projects require storage, and people in general require a lot of storage, which they may not have right now. And that storage needs to be secure, and there needs to be an economy around it. And so using a combination of blockchain and the token economy, they have an economy around how distributed storage of data is taking place, is where Filecoin comes in. Then we have the fun ones, which is Doge, let's say Shiba Inu. These are meme coins. I have no comments on them. These meme coins baffle my mind. It was literally supposed to be a joke, but it has taken on a life of its own. Now people are actually maybe developing it. Then Elon Musk did this whole thing where he went all goo goo gaga over Dogecoin, and that like took the price up sky high. So I don't know what to make of meme coins. That's a very different ball game, and no comments. Then one Indian example is Polygon, or erstwhile called Matic. So this is a layer 2 solution that's coming up on Ethereum. So these are the guys who are essentially, the gas fees on Ethereum has become very expensive, and many people want to use the Ethereum network but not pay the gas. So Polygon is like a system. It's like how UPI sits on the banking system, Polygon sits on the Ethereum system, right? And simply with a layer 2 solution, you have a proliferation of other projects of what is commonly known as distributed finance, DeFi, right? Then you have these things called distributed autonomous organizations. These are essentially like it's a bad analogy, but the best analogy I can come up with is like a company. A DAO is like a company where the MOA and the AOA are baked into code, and the MOA and AOA, which is kind of like the ledger itself, the blockchain itself, issues tokens, and those tokens can then be used to do a whole bunch of stuff like vote on things and govern the DAO itself. But the distributed autonomous organization, important word being distributed and autonomous, it has no company or private individual. So how does a regulator begin to regulate DAOs, which are all over and not in one place, not one person, is, well, challenging. Lastly, you have something called synthetic assets. You're going to hear of this very soon. Synthetic assets are essentially shares of Tesla, shares of Apple, synthetic gold. You could say that USDT is a synthetic assets. So all kinds of financial instruments, but in a cryptographic form so that it's easier to trade and exchange and speculate on. So the reason that I've given you all these lengthy examples is that all of them can't be regulated with the same brush. Each one of them will have to kind of, each project is worth its own place in the ecosystem. We may want some, we may not want some. So how this attention is going to be paid and who's going to pay attention to these projects is where a lot of the challenge is going to come from. Now, I want to kind of zoom out a bit. Now we've gone straight into the regulations and what kind of cryptocurrencies and assets and tokens exist and what the whole confusion is. And many of you might be quite confused by now. So let's zoom out a bit and get a bit of a macro view. So what is it that we're really trying to regulate here? Regulating these guys one by one is going to drive us mad. So first question is crypto. What does crypto stand for, right? What is crypto? So crypto is cryptography. And cryptography really is, if you break up the word, crypt means hidden or a vault. And the suffix graphy stands for writing. So essentially it is hidden writing in code. And historically, ever since we knew how to write, we've been writing in code. Every civilization, every culture, every government has had some sort of encryption to write in code from one another. And it's just that now encryption has taken on a very different electronic digital form. So now, what do all these crypto assets mean for us practically as a user, right? So a big part of what this means is that for the first time in human history, I suppose, we can own digitally native assets. These are assets that exist only in an intangible network on the internet. It has no physical presence or twins. And that's a bit of a mind bender in and of itself. What is a digitally native asset? But it now exists. Some of us may own it. Some of us will interact with it. And digitally native assets are growing exponentially. So there will be a lot more of this in the future than there is today. And one thing that whenever I think of digitally native assets, I always think of those stories that our grandparents told us about partition time. That there was partition, and then everybody from left had to go right and right had to go left, and all the houses and all the factories and all the money and all the wealth was left behind where they were left behind in their home states. And probably they got a handful of jewelry from here, from which they restarted their entire life. And today we, thanks to climate change, thanks to conflict, thanks to many other factors, we are already seeing a lot of mass migrations that are happening. Central America, Syria, we recently saw. We'll see a lot more. I mean, every indicator, every scientist, every report is indicating the exponential growth of mass migrations. And when these mass migrations take place, it may actually be very helpful to have digital assets, which essentially are not tied to a geography anywhere. So that when migrants go from place A to place B, they don't have to leave everything. At least some form of wealth travels with them. That's the most fundamental use case that I am seeing of this, where I am right now. But to conclude this part, there is a zoo of tokens from which emerges the larger cryptographic economy as a whole, because all those tokens that I spoke of, all of them interact with each other. None of them are in silos, right? And this cryptographic economy that we today have is a simulacra of the current physical economy. So it's like a simulation. It's like a mirror, not exactly, but absolutely derived from, inspired by. So the key takeaway from all of this is that we are now actually experiencing the birth of a new asset class, right? Now, before this, there were two broad asset classes. One were physical tokens, and physical tokens have been an asset class since time immemorial. So seashells and beads that were around God knows how many thousand years ago, those were physical tokens. They were an asset. The chieftain would wear the beads and tokens and shells around his neck in what we would today call jewelry. But that was literally a display of wealth that the chieftain would do. Secondly, you had buckskin, that was essentially deer skin. And our language today still has the legacy of this history. We still say shelling out, please shell out some money. It comes from the concept that shells used to be given out. Secondly, we still say buck. How many bucks is that? Just 10 bucks, 20 bucks, 30 bucks. $1 was actually one deer skin in America back in the day, 150, 200 years ago. And that $1 was equal to $1, right? Then other physical tokens were gold, different types of copper and iron coins that were minted from time, bronze coins that were minted from time to time. Then paper currencies that came around that were gold backed to begin with, but then later became fiat currencies, and then stock certificates were one good type of physical tokens. So these are all physical tokens. There are many more. These are just some that I'm stating here. The second big jump in physical tokens, in tokens, took place when intangible tokens also came up. And this you could think of as the entire bundle of intellectual property rights. So they are also rights, they are also assets in their own right. They also find their way into the
Drupad is just reconnecting. There's an internet issue.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Oh, lovely. I think internet failed me.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So I'll continue.
Yes, please.
Thank you. So I was talking about intangible assets and the birth of a new asset class, which is the crypto assets. And what I don't see in the discussions with regard to this is that the main challenge here is actually to regulate encryption. Because when we talk cryptography, we're actually talking encryption. That's the main technology behind blockchain, Bitcoin, all these guys. And if you've been looking around, there's already there's quite a bit of brouhaha over how encryption is going to be regulated going forward, right? You have the issues with all the big tech companies, Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, all embroiled in this encryption battle, so to speak. So that's just now the encryption battle with regard to regulatable public companies that you can actually identify a CEO and say, okay, these are the regulations, please adhere to it. But essentially, even with cryptographic tokens and cryptographic assets, the main challenge is encryption. Because see, in today's the way that things stand, there are a couple of places where encryption there's some regulatory uh, room for encryption. So you will first find section 84A, section 84A of the Information Technology Act. So that allows the government to set some permitted modes or methods for encryption, but I don't think any modes or methods have been prescribed. Secondly, there is section 69 of the Information Technology Act, which was amended, I think, in 2008, which gives power to the government to kind of decrypt if it wants any information. Then thirdly, you have Information Technology Procedure and Safeguards for Inception, Monitoring and Decryption of Information Rules, 2009, also called the decryption rules. So over here, the government, I think, wants the ability to be able to decrypt any encrypted information that is taking place in India. And the main logic here is national security, mostly, or for other allied purposes, but that will be the main thrust of it. And apart from these three provisions, you also have RBI, which is dealing with some ancillary factors. It tells its entities what kind of encryption to use, 128-bit, 64-bit, what is the strength of the encryption. SBI also similarly has some rules on how its entities will use encryption. It, I think, prescribes what is called the Secured Hashing Algorithm 2, SHA-2, which was something that the NSA in America came up with. And even Bitcoin uses SHA-2 encryption, SHA-256 more specifically. Then even TRAI has some encryption regarded laws, regulations for the ISPs that it monitors. And that's actually to make sure that there's not too much encryption, right? But these are all private users of encryption. The problem is now going to come with enforcement. How do you enforce these encryption laws or any new encryption laws that you even come up with against unknown operators, unknown projects, DAOs, distributed autonomous organization, right? So distributed finance, the moment you hear distributed, most of these projects tend to be not in one place. They tend to not have an organization. Even though on a project by project basis, you may be able to, if you really put your mind to it, stop some, but definitely not all. You may find that project A has all its nodes or 80% of its nodes in a particular country. So through that country, you may be able to shut those nodes down. But this definitely won't be the main strategy going forward. Because it's very easy to move nodes around and new projects to spring up to work around this. And one good example of how and when encryption was regulated was, I think, America. Right up to 2000s, encryption was regulated as munitions, as a part of the defense industry. And that's why there were major export controls on encryption. And when the first browsers started coming out of America, and I think it was Mozilla which faced this problem, when they were issuing, when these browsers became downloadable, let's say in India, the Indian versions of these browsers were forced to have lower encryption than the American versions, because the American government was not comfortable with high level encryption going out. So Mozilla, I think, fought it quite a bit because they didn't want to weaken their own product. And they were also, their view was that, see, our customers or our users need this encryption, otherwise the browser itself may become little unworthy. And you can't blame the Americans, right? You can't blame them, because the last time that we were in such a position was actually in after World War II. And after World War II, like during World War II, there was this big fight that took place. We all might have seen that movie, between the Enigma machine and Alan Turing, right? Alan Turing was tasked with creating the first computer to break the Enigma machine's encryption. So it's absolutely correct to say that cryptography was the modern computer's first use case. So cryptography is something that goes hand in hand with modern computing. So even now, to see this new wave of cryptographic products and ecosystem coming up is kind of par for the course. And I don't think anybody who's been around in the internet early days, and much older than us, would be surprised by this fact. Because if you look at the internet historically, it did have a very major libertarian twist to it, right? And now the problem with regulating encryption is that the moment you regulate encryption, encryption becomes pointless, right? So encryption is when you don't want anybody to know what you're doing, or you want complete privacy, complete security. So your message, your secret writing can go from point A to point B without anybody reading or snooping on it. Now let's take a very good example of Polygon. Polygon is one of the top 10, 12 projects in the crypto world right now. They are based out of Bangalore. They're doing really well, very highly regarded. And as I noted earlier, they are a layer 2 solution, right? But now if there is enough pressure put on them and the government so chooses to ensure that Polygon's encryption is accessible to the Indian government, or Indian government has a key to it, or some backdoor is left, then the entire model of Polygon will collapse. There will be no more Polygon. So, and the only thing that you really want to do, the only regulatory thing that you may want to do with a crypto project is actually see what's going on. So there's a very, very fundamental conflict that's going to arise here. And I mean, being outside regulatory controls is part of the advertised use case of a lot of cryptographic projects itself, including Bitcoin, where they really say that censorship resistance is its selling point. So regulators have their hand cut out. I mean, all these things will have to be balanced, right? And the fear here is that when you can't understand or properly deal with a particular problem, it may be very easy for you to go and ban it, as was the first impulse. We may come back to that impulse. It's not gone away. So you may see a complete ban because they're like, no, this is completely bad. We can't be dealing with this. Shut it down. End of story. How you enforce that ban is a very different ballgame. You may not be able to enforce that ban, but you may at least on paper ban it. And it may be done for a better idea, a lack of a better idea. And ultimately, the losses of the nations, all the people working on those projects and all the people who are relying on a new ecosystem to maybe survive whatever this world is that we're entering today,